Well, we are going to continue the talk about the future of green mobility, and I would like to welcome on stage two gentlemen from the Green Mobility Future Institute that would like to share their thoughts with us today. Please welcome Markus Herfort. He is the co-founder of the Green Mobility Future, and also a warm welcome to Henning Meyersrenken, the chairman of the board of the Green Mobility Future. Gentlemen, have a seat here and welcome. Nice to see you. Thank you. Thank you for being here today. So, Markus, I want to start with you. Why do you think e-mobility will not be the right solution going forward?
Hi, Lara. Thank you for having us here and for your nice introduction. The right answer would be it's not to be seen as a sole solution. So we're not, you will not hear anything from us against e-mobility, but it will be in addition. We will need a mix of technologies in the future. And if we hear the talks from yesterday from Shell with their charging stations, or from Max from the Helmholtz Institute in Ulm regarding battery development, we see there's a long way to go until there could be the right and 100% conversion into a carbon dioxide-free footprint. So things can be done now, and that is what we are convinced about. We had a meeting when our institute was founded. We had a meeting with various entrepreneurs and stakeholders from the industry, and we saw that nearly all of them are following in detail very interesting technologies, development, but it's not brought together yet. And the paradigm change that people so often cite is not the change from having the combustion engine and in the future having only e-mobility, but it should be having a mix of technologies. And that is interesting for the time frames we're talking about. When we heard how long a battery, a new battery type will take to develop this, or how long it might take until the Shell colleagues will have enough charging stations at their fuel stations, there are things that could be done now. E-mobility is something we like very much, so this is firsthand something we have to point out, but in fields where it could be realistically introduced and used. If you take cities with buses in the cities, or private traffic in cities where range and reach are capable and are realistic, then that's perfect for e-mobility. Also, to build the infrastructure, charging in these areas could be realistically done. But having it in a much bigger scale and thinking about 80 or 100% of all our mobility being just e-mobility would not work. That's what we all know. The huge power lines will not be able to carry this, and we still have traffic that we cannot change into e-mobility traffic. Take the trucks, take planes, take vessels. This is very difficult to change into battery-operated vehicles. And the point is that in a city with service and delivery cars, with municipal cars from the city, where you have the garbage delivery or whatsoever, that could work very well with e-mobility. But if you talk about long-distance trucking or other factors, that wouldn't really work. And e-mobility also has its limits. If you give you an example, we have at the moment in container vessels, we have 330 of these very big container vessels, like the one we saw in the Suez Channel, running. 15 of them at the moment have a carbon dioxide emission that would equal 700 million cars.
Okay.
It's only 15 out of 330 of these vessels. That means these vessels who could never run these long distances with batteries, they need to have another fuel and to have a more alternative fuel. And that's an example that shows us how limited we are if we just follow the e-mobility points. Furthermore, another example, if you run a Tesla with its battery, you would in the same time you run the Tesla, you would be able to run a combustion engine car 8 years to be in the same energy equivalent that you need to build the battery for the Tesla only. Okay. That means the idea behind our alternative fuel institute is we can change what is in the tank, but not necessarily we have to change the cars running.
Okay.
And that could be quite interesting for what the options for the future are. So it will be to be very open to all technology aspects that there are. It will be a mix of technologies we're thinking about. And if you, it's maybe a little bit funny, but if you recall the beginning of mobility, there were so many ideas of how to run a vehicle. Already in 1910, we had electric run vehicles, but also the combustion engine. And a little bit we are at the same point this time, where the mix of various technologies will lead us into the mobility of the future. And we try to concentrate a little bit in our communication on everything that has to do with alternative fuels, because we think there's a big gap in knowledge and in common sense. People have to learn about it, and we will talk about it maybe later. There's also a lot to do in politics, how to push this way of.
So as we heard yesterday, it's not just black and white. There are a lot of gray areas.
If life would be that simple, it would be wonderful.
It would. Henning, I would like to ask you now, what could be the solution from your point of view?
Well, in my opinion, we should have no discussions e-mobility versus combustion engines. We should have an openness up to all technologies that must be open. We will agree that e-mobility is at its best in the cities and the metropolitan areas, but on long distances. And it does not matter if it's an individual transport or commercial transport. We cannot do without combustion engines for a long time. Not in Germany, and certainly not around the world. And a second point, we should be honest if we are talking about global climate change. We will not get this issue under control if we don't add alternative fuels into the existing 1.3 billion cars around the world, worldwide. And if we don't do that, that must be possible.
Marcus, can you tell us a little bit more about the alternatives or the green fuels, please, and what exactly are their potential?
So the point is that we, first of all, have, if you see this very rough, we have two groups of fuels. If we talk about alternative fuels, many people know there is the e-fuel and there is the biofuel. And if we talk about biofuel, which is fuel made out of biomass, we talk about biofuel of the so-called second generation. The second generation biofuel means we need existing, or we use existing biomass to produce a fuel, and we don't grow especially plants to use them to create biofuel, but it's existing. It's like waste. It could be many other things. It could be there's a special experience and a special science that's working with seaweed, for example, that could be used. So there are things existing around us that we could use without having a morality problem. And there's even going from the biofuels, there's even various different fuels that could be used for the different needs. There is already existing biokerosene. And if I give you examples, because I think examples always make the picture a little bit more colorful and easier to understand, the companies Total Energy, for example, or Crop Energy is another one in Germany. They've been very good with their biofuels, which are produced already now. And in France, for example, the ADAC, which is a German car service organization, their helicopters for first aid, they all run, meanwhile, on biokerosene. Okay. So it works in planes. Biodiesel would work in big vessels. so we can have the big cruise ships running more and more, not only being hybrid, but also running on biofuels. So there are examples where this already works, and there are examples we're not talking about where it works every day. If you take a farmer, if he produces his own biofuel, which some of them can do, because they do this also for the industry, they can run their trucks and tractors, they can run them on biofuel. It's all happening now already. A little bit we get the impression we're not talking often about this, because then it would become a little bit more common sense. And if you talk about two other very interesting examples, as long as these alternative fuels don't have a certification from the government or from the industry, you're allowed to use them, but just on private-owned facilities.
Okay.
For example, the airport in Hamburg, for all their service cars, they use alternative fuels already, because it's a rather closed area and it's not public traffic. The same is happening in our country, in Stuttgart at the airport. And we will see that these little examples that are existing already also in the industry, where you have plants already producing e-fuels, will become more visible. There's Porsche with Exxon in Chile. We will hear about it later from the colleagues of eFuel Alliance. They are producing e-fuels in Chile, and they will import them to our country. And in the future, taking motorsports as a good example, motorsports has always been a good place to prove how things can work in reality and in traffic. The Porsche Cup from next year on will race with e-fuels.
Okay.
And if you watch, as a car nerd, if you watch Formula One, for example, you see the very bold Aramco brandings at the moment. And this is because Aramco is planning in the year 2024 to run their Formula One races completely on e-fuels. And by using these examples and promoting and publishing them, people will get an idea that something is happening there that you can participate in. And so it's a mixture of developing the techniques and the industry, but also widely using it, so people get used to it and follow the developments more actively.
Yeah. Henning, I want to ask, so some critics say that these alternative fuels aren't widely enough available, or that they'll be too expensive and too inefficient. What is your answer to that?
Well, I know such arguments from the e-mobility advocates. In other non-European countries, very intensive work has been done on alternative fuels, not in Germany. In Germany, there's still a lack of political will to work on it in a technology-free manner. If alternative fuels would be promoted as the e-mobility, and if the necessary legal framework would have been created, in my opinion, the critics will fall silent.
Okay, so it's just a matter of getting everyone on board and getting more awareness around these alternative fuels. Marcus, you mentioned the number of 1.3 billion vehicles that are on the road with combustion engines. Is that one of the reasons why you're so eager to talk about the ways to power the vehicles in sustainable ways?
Lara, there are three aspects why it's worth thinking and talking about it. The first is, it might sound a little bit strange as we're talking with scientists and about technique, but the first is the social one. If you have 1 million cars on the road or vehicles on the road, there is no chance to change them so quickly into e-mobile vehicles. There isn't from the production, there isn't from the charging, from the power lines we would have, from also the power plants we would need in order to charge them and run them every day. The aspects we heard yesterday of various ideas for mobility, combined mobility, which would reduce the number of cars that you really need to run, is very important. But in the meantime, so fast we will not be that quick to reduce this dramatically, the number of cars. But if we have these cars running, our idea is change what the cars are using. And if you talk about very good quality biofuel or the e-fuel, you could right away run the cars with these biofuels, for example. Biofuels are existing and are produced in a bigger scale already. E-fuels are just developing. And now take the worker, the standard German worker who works in the industry as a welder. He buys a car every 6 or 8 years, and he buys a used car. He buys a station van to drive with his family to into the holidays. He will never have a chance to buy a battery-operated or e-mobile car. It's still too expensive. It's nice to have a smart that gets support from the government if you buy it, but he has needs. He has needs for transport. He has a family with 2 children, and these are not the typical car buyers who buy a brand new car because they cannot afford this. That's one aspect. So we have a lot of cars that could continue running with a different fuel, one or the other alternatives like e-fuels or biofuels. Then the next is we have also the transporting and infrastructure subject. If we change everything into e-fuels, we could use, or biofuels, we could use, not change everything, but a big part, we could use the existing infrastructure, the gas stations. Everything can stay the same. Even the far transport ways. At the moment, there is crude oil coming from Arabia to our country to have a plant producing fuel. In the future, it could be e-fuel coming from it's the same transport from Far East. So that's something from Middle East. That is something that could work properly. And the third aspect is, as I said before, we will have a lot of cars and vehicles that cannot immediately run, depending on size or reach and range that they need, that cannot run with batteries. If you take all the truck transport we have, or buses might work depending on the distance, and then you take the aviation part. So the point is we can use a lot at the moment that is existing, and that's also looking at it from a sustainable point of view. We don't have to renew all the fleets, but we can use what is there. And that's something that could be very interesting, starting more and more using the alternative fuels.
That is a very good argument for biofuels, indeed. Henning, I want to ask you, what works where? Do we have to think differently in other parts of the world, like in Europe or in Germany, for example?
Well, I think we have to split our argumentation there. Biofuels of the second generation can be made very well in Europe. There's just built up a factory in Romania, which starts production in the next year, and in Spain we have their production coming on. And the production of e-fuels in Germany in large quantities can be done, but it is because of the climatic conditions not so the optimum. That's right. The further you go on to the south of Europe, the better the conditions are for photovoltaic. That's okay. But however, production in Europe in large quantities is not necessary. In future, e-fuels will be manufactured in the Middle East, as Markus said already, for example, Saudi Arabia, Africa, South America. And after all, after production, these fuels can be transported to Europe via the normal transport routes by ship, as we use today.
Okay. Markus, I want to ask you, what would be needed now, in your point, from a regulatory point of view? What is missing there?
Most important will be a political will to develop all these different fields of mobility. And I would really say all of them. The e-mobility at the moment has a certain priority, which can clearly be seen, but the other ways of creating new alternative ways to bring people from A to B, they have to be supported also. We have at the moment a government, maybe that will change in the next weeks, but we have a government where the Ministry for Environmental is publishing on their website, I just had a look on it this morning, still as a first sentence talking about alternative fuels, there is no official regularity process, is the first sentence.
Okay.
And if the government and the really according ministry is publishing this, how can there be a followership? How can there be people who invest in this, and where is the belief in it? The actual situation to get certificates and have the alternative fuels, whether it's biofuel or e-fuel, approved, would be that's how how politics puts it at the moment, because they withdraw a little bit from their active role. They say the industry, the car manufacturers, and the oil companies have to find a norm, a German norm, which would be a standard, and on this they have to agree that this can be run in the vehicles, and with this they have to go to the government. So it's a little bit pushing away the responsibility, as we have to be honest, one of the major tasks for our Ministry for the Environment is e-mobility at the moment. So they focus so much on it that they don't open the doors for these other development. And they went even further and said to certify and bring alternative fuels into the use, into vehicles on the road. This has to be a decision made by the federal states of Germany and not by the government. So they're pushing this into 16 federal states.
Okay.
And we know an example of Bosch, who developed a very efficient biodiesel already, and they were not successful talking to our Ministry for the Environment to get this approved, because suddenly there was a question of who's responsible for the approval. And it was pushed from here to there to there. So there has to be political action now to realize this. That would be very, very important. And there is political action in these other fields. Very quickly, there was a support if you buy an electrified car. Very quickly, there's a support if a private person fits a charging station in his own garage. This all works, but in the e-fuel or alternative fuel field, we are a little bit sleepy.
So you're saying it's the policymakers that need to get the ball rolling.
Yes.
They need to take action. Yes. Henning, you actually also mentioned, Marcus, investment, and that's something I want to talk to you now about, Henning. The investment in e-fuels is very expensive, and companies are hesitant to invest. So why is that?
Well, every development costs money. While this cost argument is used in Germany, the rest of the world is much further ahead there. Sufficient volumes in production will significantly reduce the price of biofuels and e-fuels in future. That will be a less price. And very important, we can continue using the existing filling stationing structure, not only in Germany, but worldwide. And we have not the same situation in the e-mobility vision.
Okay. Marcus, do you think we could start right away with the reduction of greenhouse gases? And what is the actual situation right now with regards to availability? And what is your advice and your vision?
So, Lara, I would have some very positive news for you.
Oh, good.
Because we are starting, this country and other countries are starting right away already. There are fuel plants who produce e-fuels and biofuels. The point is, as I said, if you take the airport in Hamburg or in Stuttgart, to use them, we are working in rather restricted areas. But the production process is developed. It's just a question of scaling it into the right way. We have test phases in various areas of Germany, but we have to speed up the development, the chance to build these plants larger, and this all based on regulation and certification and permission. We have running already, a lot of our viewers will know this, with Sunfire, we have already running in the former eastern part of Germany, we have running a plant producing about 500 tons, which is not that much, of an e-fuel a year. So this is just, again, a question of scale. To take the other end of the scale, or the other side, the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, with a company they founded, which is called Eneratech, they are refining e-fuels in a plant not bigger than a 20-feet container.
Okay.
Also, that works. The outcome is not that big, but it works. And now if we go into the very big scale, as I said, it's happening already right now. There's an invest of Aramco, again, with Repsol in Spain. It's an invest of 60 million in a real hydrogen-fed synthetic fuel plant, which has an output later on of 3.6 million liters a year of an e-fuel. And it's planned to be there at the year 2024.
Okay.
And that was a date that Max from Helmholtz Institute yesterday mentioned to develop a new type of batteries. So the timing can be really quick at the moment. And if we think about 60 million to have one plant, and Arabs investing with a Spanish leader, Repsol, to build this plant in Bilbao, and investing 60 million, I have a little mathematic example for you. We have so far in our country, since we started to support the private and the individual e-mobility, we have seen in the year 2021 755,000 registered applications to get this environment bonus, which is about 6,500 euro on a car. If you buy a hybrid or buy a completely battery-operated car. If you take this as a formula, 745,000 times 6,500, we're talking about more than 520 million that our government in this year invested supporting individuals buying electrified cars. And we have one plant that costs 60 million that produces already e-fuels until the year 2024. So that means out of this support that the government gave to all the individuals, which is great to make mobility more sustainable and more, if we have the right energy put in, and it's green energy, the charging of the cars make this all look better from the carbon dioxide footprint. We have a formula that with this year's spending on supporting the private use of the cars, we could have built 8 of these plants, for example, in our country. So we think also the government has to invest, or at least has to support the industry and encourage them to invest there, because there's no doubt that these fuel types can be used. It's not testing, it's there, it's working. Henning will have some examples from the Nurburgring about it. And as I told you, the farmers are using biofuel, the airports in Hamburg and Stuttgart are using this. So it can be used. The only question is how, if we would be in consumer products, the question is how can the rollout be done that everybody will be able to obtain, use, and maybe have this also supported by the government with a bonus.
Okay. You spoke about racing, and I want to ask Henning, your institute is very close to the Nurburgring. What role could racing play for testing new fuels and technologies concepts?
Yes, our institute, the Innovation Center, is located at the Nurburgring. And of course, Nurburgring is the fastest lap on Earth, after all. A racetrack is the best place for testing any form of vehicles. And anyway, if it's combustion cars or e-cars. What we want to show there is what is possible. Soon we will have racing events where only alternative fuels, as biofuels or e-fuels, or mixed, will be used. We are talking about the Nürburgring 24-hour race, the Truck Grand Prix, and historic races as well. We have one goal there. We are not under tax regulation on this private location, and we can test it as we want.
Okay. Sounds exciting. No limits there. I want to ask you first, Marcus, can you elaborate on microgrids and what part they play in the way to zero?
Yes, the microgrid, how it works will be known to many of you, but a microgrid, to make it simple, uses either energy from wind or photovoltaic, and working together with taking carbon dioxide from the air, from the environment, which could be helpful, then with a electrolyzer, we have the chance to produce hydrogen. And this hydrogen could be the source for either storage of energy, to store the energy in hydrogen storages, or gas, or even e-fuels. And that means we can make it very simple. It's a very simple chain of things you need in there to produce a green and alternative, for example, fuel or a very efficient hydrogen that is a green hydrogen. The microgrids are called microgrids because they can work isolated, off-grid or on-grid. And we have examples, for example, in Australia running already where mining companies far out from any electricity supply work with microgrids to run their operations. Microgrids could be a very good idea to be independent from the supply and also to produce e-fuels at the right places.
Henning, if you could briefly, we're almost out of time, but I would also like to ask you if you can tell us also a little bit about microgrids before we go.
I want to give you a short definition for it.
Okay.
Microgrid produces its own energy out of renewable sources on its own. An example, the Nurburgring has a total power of consumption around about 4.5 megawatt for hour peak. And it's planned to build up 2 wind turbines with a volume of 8.4 megawatt per hour peak and photovoltaic systems in the first step with 4.5 megawatt per hour peak. So we have approximately 13 megawatt peak of renewable energy. And then it works like Marcus told you already. What is not needed for the Nurburgring, normally you can storage it into hydrogen, and then you can use it at hydrogen, or you transfer it further on into e-fuels if you want to, and that you can test on the track again. So the goal is to make the racetrack green.
Okay.
Green hell.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Marcus and Henning, for your insights on e-fuels. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura.
Bye-bye.